Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to day 2 of the Global Flourishing Conference. I'm excited to be with you again. I hope you're all feeling well rested and ready to dig into more inspiring conversations and presentations. Yesterday was just absolutely amazing, and I have no doubt that the same is in store for you today. I'm Ridi Klabi. I'm a journalist, producer, author, and a former radio presenter. And I'm very honored to serve as the MC again for this conference. So today, we are going to hear from another exciting group of speakers. This will include how the arts promote flourishing amid adversity, and religions as a source of individual, communal, and social flourishing, and more. So before we dive in, we've got to do some housekeeping. Let me take a few moments to point out the key features on this virtual conference platform. So here we go. Number 1, how to navigate between sessions. Right now, we are in the first session on day 2 under the program agenda. To move between sessions, click on Back to Timeline. Back to Timeline is very important. You're going to hear that a lot today. Back to Timeline, and then enter each session as it begins, okay? And then the second thing I want you to keep in mind, explore the scientific abstract poster hall. How to do that? The global call for abstracts this year resulted in over 300 submissions. And of course, an independent jury of global leaders in the field reviewed and scored the submissions and invited the select authors to present their work in the poster hall. You can see the 82 posters and engage directly with the authors by entering the poster hall from the main timeline. If you want to learn more about the conference partners and presenters in the resource gallery, it's right there, resource gallery and other exhibition halls located on the right-hand side of the platform, And then lastly, of course, if you wish to engage with each other and the presenters, we encourage you to use the chat function. It worked very well yesterday. Use the chat function in the plenary session to ask your questions. You can also network with fellow attendees in the networking hub. So let's begin the programming with a look back at yesterday's session. Let's find out what happened yesterday.
Put simply, just as global health was important to progress at the turn of the 20th century, global flourishing is the field that we need right now. We need it because of the nature of the challenges we face. We need to transform energy usage to prevent the next pandemic, to cooperate on a truly planetary scale, to live peacefully together, and to nurture our humanity through AI.
So, even in great adversity or, times of warfare, great material deprivation, people can attain levels of health and well-being, but we would argue that they're not truly flourishing unless those around them are doing well. So for us, flourishing is this bigger picture.
But sometimes we need to go right back to the basics to understand what's going on here. And sometimes we need to go right back. What are we talking about here? What are the concepts and indicators that we're using? What actually is the theory of change here? How do we expect it to work? How can we improve it and move from there?
It's important to build cohesiveness. And what is important for this cohesiveness is the mutual respect, compassion, and unconditional support, which is very important component to put everything together in a bun.
And can AI and the advances in all kinds of technologies, subsequent technologies, actually deepen our sense of kinship, deepen our social capital, deepen our community sort of resilience?
Thinking that a single person has one set of values seems like itself like a real simplification.
AI models and data should be open source rather than closed. That's a very important debate for the concept of flourishing, because in order to really understand, I think, the limitations of these models, their potential for magnifying bias, their potential for disrupting jobs, and a lot of their dangers. A lot more transparency is needed.
Loneliness doesn't just decrease our flourishing, it also increases our risk of premature death. In fact, some statistics suggest that it might be as bad for us as things like smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
So I think while loneliness, is in part about individual circumstances, the advisory makes clear that, we also have to examine the societal conditions that shape access to meaningful connections.
So if one society values competition, productivity over other things such as intrinsic value, that we are worthy because we exist, but for what we can do, what we can produce, I think that kind of a society would inevitably lead people to feel alienated and lonely.
We need to be valued, to be appreciated, and we need to have opportunities to add value in the family, in the classroom, at work. Not only to know that people value us and appreciate us, but that there's things that we can contribute to them and to their lives.
But the boldness of being able to declare love when that's deemed appropriate is liberating.
I'll close with a quote attributed to Rumi, the 13th century poet and Sufi mystic. Goodbyes are only for those who love with their eyes, because for those who love with heart and soul, there's no such thing as separation. This is the emerging spirit that characterizes solidarity and love for shared flourishing.
All right, so let's get going then. Today's first segment is titled How the Arts Promote Flourishing Amid Adversity. So the study of human flourishing, the investigation into what it means to be human and how we interact with ourselves and each other would not be complete without an exploration of the creative arts. Humans have used creative expression since the dawn of time. The arts brings us together and helps us to communicate when language does not suffice, and that happens a lot, right? Art also helps us to process our own experiences, especially when facing adversity and trauma. In this two-part session, researchers and creative artists will come together to discuss the dynamics of this process across cultures and also developmental life stages, and importantly, how we can foster greater use of the creative arts to navigate challenging moments in our lives and in our communities. Returning for the second year, please welcome Ben Arthur, host of the Songwriter podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That was beautiful. My name is Ben Arthur. I am the host and creator of a podcast called Songwriter. Songwriter turns stories into songs. Basic idea, an author tells a story, and then a songwriter performs a song in response. We featured artists like Questlove and Joyce Carol Oates, Susan Orlean, George Saunders, Roxanne Gay, and David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. Essentially, we're exploring the idea of what's called an answer song. Answer songs have a long history in music, and you actually know some answer songs without necessarily even knowing what they are. This Land Is Your Land by Woody Guthrie is an answer song to Irving Berlin's God Bless America, a sardonic answer song, in fact. And Anaconda by Nicki Minaj is an answer song written in response to Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby Got Back. This is the same idea as what we're doing here, except it's more curated. Templeton invited me and the artists here to take part in a conversation artistically about art as a means of facing adversity. And what you're going to witness today is an act of emotional and artistic alchemy, an act of translation with two artists today, Asli Perker and Tuna Kirimichi. And first, Turkish journalist and best-selling author Asli Perker has published 6 novels, which have been translated into 23 languages. On her Instagram, you can actually watch her greeting a fan who traveled all the way to Istanbul from Japan just to meet her. She's also a dear friend and is so kind-hearted and non-judgmental that she doesn't even mind when her American friends call her Ashley. Asli Perker, welcome.
Hello. Hi, Ben.
It's so nice to have you here. Asli, you wrote this piece after a conversation you and I had with Aranda Jaiwikrame. How did Aranda's research shape your process and also the story that you eventually wrote?
Well, it actually made me realize that I often use art in hard times. I didn't know that, seriously. Till we spoke about it, I didn't know that I wrote in response to hard times, suffering, pain, going through difficulties. Of course, probably intuitively you do that, but I had not thought about it. And then, I think a lot. I think about a lot of things, but this was miraculously was not one of those things. And after we talked about it, I started thinking, and then I asked myself, well, asking this question was very important. Like, how did I go actually through hard times? Did I really use art? And then hence this article came out. It turns out it started when I was 6 years old. Like at a time that I did not even know those kinds of concepts like art or writing in response to suffering even existed. I didn't even know that back then.
Interesting. This is an extremely personal story. In some ways about your very genesis as not just a writer, but maybe even as a human being. You actually told me that as you wrote it, you found yourself crying. What was it about this story that is so deeply held? And I'll mention too that I've known you for 20 years, and you had never told me this story before.
I know, it's interesting. Like this actually, I realized again writing this article, especially this story defined my life, kind of, and. I cried because, see, as a kid, we as a family moved around the country almost every year and a half, very often. And while I was writing it, I knew that, of course, right? We moved a lot, but I didn't know like how many cities in how many years. I never counted that because I think it's so much trauma moving from one city to another all the time. I never actually thought about it because it's too much. But when I was writing this article, I realized by the time I was 9 years old, I had already moved 8 times. And it's not even 1 year in a place. And in those 9 years, I had my mother in a devastating car crash, almost dead. I had my grandfather, whom I stayed with when I was parted from my mother because I needed care. I had my grandfather die. So, and I had nothing, no belongings with me. And then these kind of like, as I was writing, they all like came, like almost slapped me in the face. And maybe that's why I never actually told you about these, or you or your family, and we're all very close friends. And the thing is, I sat down to write the article, to start, and then it took me days. Like I'm thinking, and this was not the article that I actually wanted to write. I want to write completely something else about real, like going through hard times, because last year we went through a very bad earthquake. I want to write about that. I wanted to be a part, like how I was a part of it. But this came out. So this is actually the pushing power of, I think, writing, literature. It really brings out whatever is inside you. You cannot control it. You think you can control it. You think these words belong to you, but I think we belong to them.
Beautifully said. With no further ado, would you share your piece with us?
Of course. I hope it's not too long. And feel free to stop me if it feels long. I wrote my first novel in secret, which is true. While I worked on the book, I supported myself as a journalist and a barista, and 2 years later, I signed a contract with a prestigious publishing house. I waited for its release while navigating the busy streets of New York. My family lived an ocean away in Turkey. Anticipation built as the month of publication approached, and I was rewarded with a brief but significant feature in a prominent monthly magazine. I called my mom, trying to sound casual. After a moment, I suggested she go get the monthly magazine. She knew I was a journalist and asked if I had written something for it. Kind of, I said. I called her back 20 minutes later when I guessed she had just come back to the house. I gave her the page number and listened with pleasure as she turned its pages. But this page reviews new novels that are coming out this month, she objected. I told her it was the correct page. Take a look at the books and see if anything seems familiar, I said. The cover of my debut novel featured a weathered sepia tone family photograph taken in Crete from my grandmother's hometown. Oh my, they've used our family picture for the cover, my mother exclaimed excitedly. Who's the author? I asked coyly. My mother read my name with a sense of incredulity, as though encountering it for the first time. Then she read it once more and let out a delighted scream. You wrote this book! It is one of the most cherished moments in my life, and a swell of emotion brought tears to my eyes. It was a combination of a long journey, one that in many ways my mother started me on. You see, when I was 6 years old, my mother was in a devastating car accident. It occurred at 3 o'clock in the morning during a fierce blizzard, and the driver was drunk. The car careened off a cliff, landing precariously on a rock, narrowly escaping a plunge into the tumultuous waters of the Araxes River below. The impact left her body shattered. Her eye was torn away, and the tip of her nose hung by a thread. Somehow, she summoned the strength to climb a sheer cliff back up to the road with just one arm, her feet bare in 5-foot deep snow. In this devastated state, she managed to flag down the only intercity bus in operation at that early hour. The following day, as I stood by her hospital bed, I couldn't even recognize her. She lay there, tears streaming down her face. Following the accident, my brother and I were taken to our family's hometown, Izmir, while my mother remained behind. It would be nearly a year before we would see her again. I was to stay with my grandparents, while my brother, the person I loved most, was placed in the care of our aunt. I had nothing, no toys, no books, not even proper clothes. Soon after I arrived, my grandfather passed away after suffering a stroke. This left my grandmother in the throes of a profound depression. She spent most of her time sleeping. You can imagine the immense relief I felt when my parents finally arrived and brought us to our new home in a different city. However, it wasn't long before my mother slipped in the snow, fracturing her other arm, and began experiencing neurotic episodes where she believed she was teetering on the edge of death. Many times I found her on the floor, stiff and engulfed in terror. Each time I worried that she would not recover. Traumatized, lonely, and confused, I threw myself completely into school and the world of books. My first grade teacher was the only person who seemed to grasp what I craved most, writing. I was a peculiar and curious child, and my teacher was captivated by my ambidexterity and my penchant for mirror image writing. She showered me with affection, nurturing me in a way that no other adult did at that point in my life. Encouraged by my teacher, I meticulously recorded my thoughts. I wrote in backwards handwriting as a safeguard against prying eyes. I tried to write honestly about reality as I experienced it, but it was hard. My words got tangled. Nevertheless, for me, writing was the best way to organize my thoughts. A pencil and paper were always within arm's reach, my tools for capturing reflections and finding clarity on any subject that occupied my mind. I didn't recognize this as writing back then. It was more of an ingrained way of life. My mind functioned in no other way. 2 years later, we had moved yet again to another city, and I was separated from my teacher. One day I asked my mom if I could send a letter to my beloved teacher. Thankfully, she recognized the significance and did not dismiss it as a child's play. Soon enough, replies arrived both for me and for my mom. I don't remember what my teacher wrote to me, but the letter to my mother forever altered the course of my life. In the letter, my teacher explained that children my age aren't typically able to write about their feelings with such eloquence. She gently suggested that I might have a natural talent for literature and advised my mother to nurture this potential with care. This idea resonated deeply, and my mom took the advice to heart. She enrolled me in private grammar and literature lessons. For the rest of my young life, I navigated through a transient landscape of cities, engulfed in a whirlwind of people and ensnared in dramatic twists and turns. Yet, within this whirlwind, I discovered solace not only in the act of writing, but also in nurturing a steadfast hope for the future. I had a clear vision of what I aspired to be and what I was determined to achieve. The first story in that novel centered on a young woman grappling with thoughts of suicide. She had lost her brother in a car accident and her mother to suicide. The stories, of course, were based on my own life. I vividly recalled when my mother, in the throes of one of her attacks, unconvinced she was dying, asked my aunt to take care of me when she was gone. In the novel, I delve into the perspective of the young girl who, at the pivotal juncture, wonders why her mother didn't have faith in their father to care for her and why she wouldn't wish for the children to be with him. When my mom eagerly rushed to the bookstore and purchased the book, she had no idea what awaited her within its pages. After reading it, she called me excited but troubled. I love the book. You have a natural gift. But, she said, I yearned to interject but found myself unable to speak. I now understand that I hurt you too much. I feel so guilty, she told me. It was a sad and sincere confession, though wholly unjustified. The poor woman, burdened by her own suffering, carries such a heavy weight all those years. As for me, I had just been a young girl, a vital part of her life, inevitably tough, unintentionally affected by the state she had been in. In hindsight, it is fascinating to consider how the experiences of my young life wove themselves into the fabric of my debut work. Through the years, I had assimilated them until at last I told my story. I endowed the characters with new identities, forging a deliberate separation between myself and the events, but the emotions and the chaos are palpably recognizable. Oddly, it is only in this moment, as I write this, that the significance of the title of that book, The Scent of the Others, dawns on me. Finally, I was sharing my written world. Finally, I entrusted my story to others. What I can say is that writing saved my life twice. First, during a period when I didn't know how to navigate the world alone, my short notes became my companions, helping me stay afloat. And then, years later, it became a new lifeline, allowing me to reimagine the story of my life. As Nietzsche said, we have art in order not to die of the truth. I have goosebumps.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can tell you were feeling that.
Yeah, thanks.
And now for the song written in response. Tuna Kirimichi is a filmmaker, a poet, a novelist, and a rock star. And when I say rock star, I mean rock star. On Spotify alone, 1 million people listen to his songs every month. And while Tuna's best-selling books have only been translated into 14 languages, he graciously agreed to host the books-oriented podcast Bibliotherapy with Osley, but only because they're in love. Tuna, welcome.
Yes, we cannot deny it.
It's lovely to have you here. Tuna, you faced what to me would be an almost unbearable challenge in writing this song. Not only do you have to perform it live for the very first time here for us, but in creating it, you had to interpret this incredibly personal story from the woman you love. What was your first entry into how to write your song?
You are right, Ben. It's a challenge. It was a challenge for me. It's difficult enough to turn a written text into lyrics. Then composing it is another challenge. But I love interdisciplinary art sessions. Also, I have known Aslı Perker's childhood story already. I have known that story about the Araxes River for years. I think it's a very sad story, sad story, especially for a child. No child can forget this. So it had been waiting for years to turn into a story and a urban song and poetry. I think it's waiting. This story, it's been waiting since years to come to me for composing a song. I feel like this now.
Beautiful. In your song, I'm sorry, were you saying something?
Yes, and while I'm working on the song, I thought that the Araxes River find the way through the very hard lands of Eastern Anatolia. You know that geography. For thousands of years, it brings life, joy, hope, and fear to the people, just like life itself. I think art should be the answer to this flow. The river flows like life, and we, brave artists, move forward with it always. This
Understood.
is my inspiration and motivation for against the story of Aslı and for my song.
Beautiful. So you're saying that the Araxes River is sort of a metaphor for life, underscoring how each of us has a choice in how to respond to adversity. I'm guessing that you, like most artists, have used art in your own life to find expression and comfort in difficult moments. Is that true? And are there any songs from your catalog that you recall using that strategy?
Senin de özel hayatında böyle bir şey var mı? Sana yol göstermiş şarkın oldu mu?
Yes, several times. For example, my most popular song sounds like a love song. Birden geldiğin aklıma. Everybody loved that song as a love song between man and woman or something. But in fact, I composed that song for my son when he were 2 years old. I composed this song for him, only for him, because this is something, a kind of love between father and his baby. I composed the song of this love affection, but now the audience, everybody think that it's a love song between man and woman, but it shows a lot of way to me and my son as well.
Oh, beautiful. And he knows it's for him?
Yes, I declared in the middle of the concert. He ashamed too much. Yes.
It was a shame.
Beautiful. Well, speaking of concerts, are you ready to share your song? I want to say to the audience, by the way, that what Tuna is doing today is exceedingly rare. I'm a musician myself, and when you write a new song, usually you hide it deep in the set list. You maybe don't even mention that it's a new song. If you get through it, you can maybe admit it's a new song, but you usually, it hasn't been ingrained into your soul quite yet. And so what Tuna is doing is incredibly brave, and I know it's hard to send emotion through a screen, but if everyone can give him all of the warmth and welcome and kindness for sharing this world premiere of his brand new song, please do. Tuna, please.
let your pain unlock the gate of your hell. Don't make agony speak for you. You read the bond of your heart and wrote it well. Don't let it cover everything you do. Tell me how, tell me why, tell what I've been waiting for while an excess river flows. Tell me how, tell me why, tell what I've been waiting for while an excess river flows. They say life flows like raging rivers. I think you better turn this into art. Get used to it, you'll be always the hero. Like a message you know by heart. Tell me how, tell me why, tell what I've been waiting for while an excess river flows. Tell me how, tell me why, tell what I've been waiting for while an excess river flows. Don't let your pain unlock the gate of your hell. Don't make agony speak for you. You read the bond of your heart and wrote it well. Don't let it cover everything you do. Tell me how, tell me why, tell what I've been waiting for while an excess river flows. Tell me how, so tell me why, tell what I've been waiting for while an excess river flows.
Beautiful. Azli, what was your first response to hearing this song that told your story, in a different way, that translated your story to music?
Well, I loved it, and I memorized the words actually, and I was surprised to hear the words. Don't let your pain unlock the gate of your hell. I was surprised to see that my feelings sounded like that, and it is true. It is really true. It was very nice to see that he really, because we did not talk about it, by the way. It was a very short amount of time we had. So I wrote the article, and I was, as I said before, I was planning to write something else, but this article came out. So we actually had talked about something else before. So he had very limited time, but I was happy to see that I was able to show my feelings right, or he was very, empathetic to understand them well. But I'm very happy with the words, and I was being mad at him for a while now for not writing me a song, because he has songs for other people, for his ex-wives, his son, and all that jazz. I was very upset about that. Like, write me a song. And then he writes this song, and he says, now you cannot say that I did not write you a song. I'm like, well, this is not romantic, though. It is sad. It is a painful story.
Romantic, but in other way.
In another way.
Yeah.
I think it is very romantic to be seen, to have your emotional reality seen.
Sure.
Azli, you mentioned earlier the earthquakes have taken a terrible toll on Turkey, and I know you've done some reporting from some of the most devastated areas. How is the country recovering now? And is there anything in these last moments of our conversation that you feel the international community needs to know about Turkey?
Well, our geography is a very tough geography to start with. It's not limited to Turkey. The Middle East is a very tough place to live. There is not one day that you can escape pain. It is very interesting that because I lived in the United States for 10 years, and the ocean actually made it possible to get away from the problems of the world. It was seriously true. The problems of the country itself was something else, but they weren't as hard as they are here in Middle East. So it was hard. It was easy to get away, but here every day is a challenge. And with the earthquake, it even became worse. I was recently there only 2 weeks ago. I kind of made friends with a family there. I had stayed in their tent when I was there reporting. And then we became like family. They came here in Istanbul, stayed with me and my daughter. We became close friends now. So I went back to visit them. They have no house. They have nothing. They have no hot water. But interestingly, they are singing a lot of songs. They are singing a lot of songs. They're playing a lot of songs.
Beautiful. I wish them all the recovery in the world. Asli, Tuna, thank you so much for taking part in this experiment. Thank you to everyone for listening. And now we're going to have a discussion by people who understand these things in different ways than artists do. It is my pleasure to introduce the panel segment of this session on how the arts promote adversity, moderated by Dr. James Pawelski. He is a professor of practice at the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Doctor?
Ben, thank you so much. And Asli and Tuna, what a marvelous start to this package, this session where we experience vicariously through you rich, deep, meaningful life. And I think that one of the mistakes that we sometimes make in academia or in the scientific world is to forget that questions about art, questions about flourishing, questions about struggling with life itself are human questions. They're questions at the root of who we are as human beings. They affect our heart, not just our head. And I think that what you have done in opening your experience, sharing your story from the heart, sharing your music from the heart is a great way for us to begin then our reflections about what can the science say about these parts of human experience. It has to be an integration. If the science forgets the heart and the human and the embodied experience, we might as well give up on the science. On the other hand, I think science has a lot to say about these kinds of experiences. I love what you said, Asli, the Nietzsche quote, we have art in order not to die of the truth. And I think that science can also be a partner with art in helping us to not to forget, not to pretend that difficulty doesn't exist, not to put our heads in the sand and ignore difficulty and adversity, but rather to have, nor to be overwhelmed by it and to be stuck in a place of depression or hopelessness or anxiety, but rather to face it in new ways. As you said, Ben, new ways of thinking, new ways of understanding, and bringing all of that together collaboratively, integratively, I think is an inspiring way of acknowledging and appreciating, Asli, what you shared with us, and acknowledging and appreciating the challenges that we all face simply by virtue of being human. So thank you again so much for that wonderful beginning to this session. So it is my honor now, as Ben said, to serve as the moderator for a panel discussion of this question, how the arts
can promote flourishing amid adversity. And I'd like to begin by welcoming the distinguished members of the panel. And so our first panelist is Dr. Aranda Jayawikrame. He is Harold W. Tribble Professor of Psychology at Wake Forest University, where he is also a Senior Research Fellow in the Program for Leadership and Character. Welcome, Aranda.
Thank you so much, James.
And Maggie Zhao is the Director of the Teaching and Learning Evaluation and Measurement Unit at the University of Hong Kong. And she is also the President of the Education Division of the International Positive Psychology Association. Thanks for being with us today, Maggie. Maggie, I think you might still be on mute.
Thanks, James. Delighted to be part of this panel.
Fantastic. Welcome. And Sunil Iyengar is the Director of the Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts in the United States. Welcome to the panel, Sunil.
Great to be here as well. Thank you, James.
And I'd like to thank each of the members of the audience for being with us today. If you in the audience would like to join the discussion, please enter your questions via the chat function, and we'll try to include as many of them as we can today. So I'd like to begin by inviting each of you to reflect on the inspiring and moving presentation that we have already heard. What's something that particularly struck you about what Ben and Osley and Tuna presented? Aranda, can we start with you?
Yes, thanks, James. Yes, and thanks also to Tuna and Osley for a wonderful performance. It was, I really enjoyed listening to Osley's story and then Tuna's transformation, right, of the sentiments in that essay into that beautiful song. I would probably say two things. One is that, I think one really important lesson that we can gain from Osley and Tuna is that, we are here talking about flourishing and how we can achieve flourishing at a global scale. And, it's important to remember that when we talk about flourishing, we're not interested in a simplistic positivity, right? We're not interested in cultivating lives where everyone is, as happy as they can be for as often as possible. That's not what we're interested in. I think one thing that really comes out in the work of Osley and Tuna is that life is complex, right? Life is full of, wonderful experiences and happiness and peak experiences, but it can also be full of suffering and challenges and setbacks and failures. And that's all part of life. And what it means to have a life that is flourishing involves both, appreciating and savoring the highs, but also confronting and managing the lows. And I think one important role of art is highlighting the fact that life is complex, and that in order for us to flourish, we need to face up to that complexity. Another point I'll make about their performance is that the act of creativity can really be a wonderful tool when we face up to adversity, because and I'm sure all of us have had this experience. When we're facing severe or significant adversity, we can feel overwhelmed by it. We could maybe take some time to figure out how we should confront it, and then we can try and figure out how we can manage and overcome those setbacks or that adversity. And I think one potential tool that creativity gives us is to help us think, well, what lesson can I learn from this experience? How should I respond? Should I give up? Should I try and make sense of what happened? Is there something important that I can learn from this so I can move on? So there's something empowering about creativity that can maybe enable us to maintain a sense of control over our lives, even in the toughest moments.
Fascinating, Aranda. I want to come back to this question of creativity a little bit later in the panel. I think it's a super important point here. For now, Maggie, curious what struck you about the presentation.
Sure. I was really impressed by the incredible power of writing and music and narratives. Just through hearing the powerful stories and the melodies, I could vividly imagine or feel the emotions and the complexities and the nuances in the experience. Also, the courage and the resilience in facing these challenges, these hardships are really inspiring and reminding us that we are not alone in our struggles.
Such an important point, because when we're in adversity, we oftentimes think no one is here. I'm all alone. This is why is this happening to me, and why am I the only person on earth who's experiencing it? And that sense of companionship or community is a really important one to maintain when possible. So again, a really important topic we'll want to come back to. Thank you, Maggie. Sunil, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I just on a personal level, Osley's remarks especially reminded me that I've moved around a lot as a child, and to know that maybe it wasn't as severe in my case. There certainly are ways you feel like you want to cope with those kinds of situations growing up. And in my case, I did also seek refuge in literature and writing and music and the arts. So I'll just give a couple of quick quotes that, since the Nietzsche quote kind of made me think of them. One is T.S. Eliot's line, "Humankind cannot bear very much reality." And another is Robert Frost, when he talks about poetry being a momentary stay against confusion. And I think this resonates a little with what Aranda was saying about, the complex. I think the arts provide a system by which one can navigate the complexity and truly grapple with ambiguities of life. And the other thing I'll just quickly say is, from a research perspective, I'm looking forward to getting into the discussion there. I know that expressive writing, for example, has been shown in study after study to play a positive role in healing and in certainly in combating trauma, as has music. And we've done a lot of research, had the privilege to co-fund research in this line of work, also with military and veteran populations. I mean, we can get into some of that, but it was really pleasing to see a microcosmic kind of example of that here.
Terrific. Thank you, Sunil. And that's a great segue to move into a discussion of the science, because that's what we really want to focus on in this portion of the presentation. Just want to again remind our attendees, don't forget to use the chat function to share any questions you would like our panelists to answer as we move through this session. So there's a lot of work now being done in this domain. There's actually a whole field dedicated to this work called the positive humanities. The positive humanities is a transdisciplinary field of academic scholarship, scientific research, and creative practice focused on the relationship between arts and culture and human flourishing. It seeks to understand how various forms of arts and culture can support different types of flourishing in different contexts, and use this knowledge to cultivate flourishing through the humanities, which we refer to collectively as arts and culture. Now, full disclosure, I'm a philosopher. When I first heard Dr. Martin Seligman, the founder of the field of positive psychology, talking about positive psychology, I thought, this is fantastic. And my interest and my domain, my area of expertise would be in the positive humanities. And this is the focus of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project that I established 10 years ago at the University of Pennsylvania. I am pleased that there are now many scholars, researchers, practitioners working in this and related domains. Just last year, we published the Oxford Handbook of the Positive Humanities. We have a book series with Oxford University Press on the humanities and human flourishing. If anybody would like to learn more about this field in general, you can visit our resource gallery or the website, www.humanityesandhumanflourishing.org. There is much work to be done in this field, and so we hope that everyone will join us. So with that broad background, I want to dive in now to some of the specifics of the scientific work here. And I'd like to ask our panelists about some of the work that they have done connecting art and human flourishing, especially in times of adversity. So, Aranda, I want to start with you. And you talked about creativity and how that can be such an important element of the artistic process in moving us from suffering to positive emotions like compassion, empathy, and gratitude. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the results that scientific investigation have found with those terms?
So there's been a lot of research examining whether creativity can be a tool that people can use to move past the negative impact of adversity and trauma, right, as I mentioned earlier. And one way in which engaging in creative activities can be helpful is that it can put people into a state of flow. right? So when you're engaging in creative acts, your mind is focused. You're pushing yourself to think about the how to make sense of the event, how to create something artistic in response to the event. And the experience of flow and engagement, we know it's associated with well-being benefits. So the idea is that experiencing flow and engagement can help mitigate, right, the negative emotional reaction of going through that event. Another way in which engaging creative acts can be helpful, and this goes back to a point that Sunil made, is that it can help you make meaning of the event. So in many cases, when something negative or something traumatic happens to you, part of the challenge is figuring out, how do I make sense of this in light of my own existing worldview? Right? How can I integrate this into my understanding of the world? So one way in which you can do that is by engaging in expressive writing, right? So this is a technique that Jamie Pennebaker at the University of Texas Austin pioneered. And engaging in expressive writing really does help both with improving your mental health, and in some cases, even improving your physical health. So engaging in creative acts can really help you move past the immediate negative impact of going through an adverse or traumatic event. So there's been a lot of work looking at the therapeutic benefits of going through creativity. I should mention, however, that another way to think about creativity is in terms of an outcome, a positive outcome of going through adversity. So the idea here, when people think about exemplars such as Vincent van Gogh or Frida Kahlo, right? One reason why those examples stick in people's minds is that these are people who engage in, amazing creative endeavors, but they also have lives that are characterized by struggle and adversity. So I'll talk more about this idea that maybe there is this strong, consistent link between adversity and creativity, maybe later on in a discussion. But I think one underappreciated outcome of going through adversity that I definitely think psychologists have not studied as much as the mental health benefits of engaging in creative acts is thinking about creative achievement as an outcome of going through adversity. So, I mentioned Van Gogh and Kahlo. You could think about the blues tradition in the United States as an example of an artistic genre that emerged out of the, substantial adverse experience of the Black community in the United States. So I think there are different ways in which we can think about the role of creativity. There's been a lot of work done on the mental health benefits. I think there's a lot of work to be done on thinking about creative achievement as an outcome of adversity.
So, Ron, if I can follow up on that question, does that mean that adversity is required to have creativity? Is adversity something that we must have in order to develop character? I know sometimes there are artists or writers who, it seems, seek out adversity so that they can be creative, or there was a cartoon I once saw where an aspiring white writer was upset with her parents for having given her a happy childhood because now she had nothing to write about.
No, that's an excellent question, James. And I'll start by answering the broader question first about whether adversity is needed for specific character traits to be developed. And I'll answer the question about creativity afterwards. So, there is a rich tradition in philosophy, in multiple religious traditions, that discusses the question of, why is there adversity in the world, and are there uses to adversity? And, philosophers like Aristotle, eminent religious figures like Gautama Buddha have argued that going through adversity is necessary for experiencing certain types of positive changes within your character. So, for example, Aristotle spoke about the importance of having life push up against you, right? So that certain traits can develop. The Buddha argued about how understand that life is partially suffering can help unlock wisdom and lead to greater character development. So, this idea that adversity can lead to specific positive changes, that's an idea that exists in multiple religious and philosophical traditions. And there is some empirical evidence for that. So we know that people who experience high levels of cumulative lifetime adversity, or to the extent to which we experience adverse life events, a high number of adverse life events at some point in their life, they tend to exhibit more compassion towards others compared to people who have had lower levels of cumulative lifetime adversity. Now, to go back to the specific point about creativity, now there is this debate in psychology about, I think it's the mad genius hypothesis, the idea that maybe there's a link between suffering and creativity. And I will say that the existing evidence doesn't point to a link. So to the extent to which there is a link, it's probably it's somewhat idiosyncratic. And it might be that there's sort of a perfect sweet spot where some degree of adversity plus some degree of creative motivation, interacts to lead to creative achievement. One argument that's been posited is that certain types of adversity might be examples of diversifying experiences, or a type of experience that puts you on the outside of mainstream cultural thought or mainstream society. So the idea is that going through a diversifying experience gives you a different perspective on the world. And that is that can be an engine for creative achievement. Mm-hmm. So I think certain types of experiences can function as catalysts for creativity, but a lot more scientific work needs to be done.
Terrific. Thanks, Aranda. Maggie, I want to get you to weigh in on this question, because I know you've done quite a bit of work on the relationship between well-being and ill-being. And it's a tricky relationship, right? It's not, they seem to be, it's not that they're completely different. It's not that one always leads to the other. We mentioned Nietzsche earlier. He also has that famous or perhaps infamous quotation, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." And I think in some cases that's true. And in some cases it's not true. Right. So can you help us a little bit, based on your research, what insights might you share with us about this tricky relationship between well-being and ill-being?
Sure. So I do believe this is a fundamental question for the science of flourishing. And also in the literature, actually, some researchers believe that well-being and ill-being, they are like an opposite on a single continuum, while other researchers argue that well-being and ill-being are two separate or independent constructs. And also, Dr. Louis Tay and we recently conducted some study to explore this controversy using some methodological strategies and also based on a large data set. So over research findings actually support bipolarity, meaning that well-being and ill-being can be considered as located at the opposite ends of a single bipolar continuum. So what's the implication of this study, or what does this mean for using arts to help people move from suffering to flourishing? There are three key takeaways. Number one, this bipolarity view recognizes the interconnectedness between well-being and ill-being. So moving away from suffering brings someone closer to flourishing. And number two, from a methodological point of view, this bipolarity does not contradict with the idea that well-being and ill-being can coexist or can function independently. So this also inspires new explorations such as whether arts as a facilitator or as a third variable may have the same or different effect on reducing suffering and promoting flourishing. And another takeaway is that our findings also offers a parsimonious approach to designing art-based interventions that address both well-being and ill-being simultaneously. Art therapy, for example, has been shown to not only reduce stress, but also increase resilience. So we hope our research offers some new insight and evidence on this topic.
Terrific, thank you. So I think we're getting some really important nuance here, because it's easy, if you read the headlines or you just have a sense of what's kind of out there in the world, it seems that there can be, the one side or the other. On the one hand, as you were saying, Aranda, talk of flourishing can be heard as, we're just going to be smiling all the time, and we're not going to have any problems in our lives. That's just simply unrealistic, and so we don't want to. We want to avoid that kind of trying to shy away from reality. On the other hand, we can almost fetishize fetishize adversity, right? And say, oh my goodness, it's only in the dark places that we grow and learn, and we gain depth as human beings. And sometimes we can get so lost in those places that that really isn't a road to flourishing so much as hopelessness and despair, depression and other kinds of things. So the middle ground of being aware, acknowledging the realities of our world, and then, as you said, Aranda, thinking about how we respond to those, what kinds of meaning that we create, can help us to find a way of flourishing even while acknowledging the adversity. So Neil, I want to bring you into this because there's a little bit of a paradox here, because your position at the National Endowment for the Arts would lead one to think that, you're all into, writing and music and all those kinds of things, which you are. And yet you are leading scientific efforts funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. Why is science important for the arts?
Well, that's a terrific question, James. Just before I answer that, I just wanted to call out something Aranda said and Maggie referred to, and it's really been great to hear all this. I was thinking about the connections, that researchers like Nancy Andreasen have shown through neuroscience between creativity and potentially mental health issues among artists, certain artists and writers. And obviously you can't extrapolate from that. But of course, in the lore of artists and in the history, the way we talk about artists and writers, we often think about, that there's histories sometimes of substance abuse and depression, et cetera. And I think we have to face those well-being issues that are associated with some forms of, some writers and artists. That said, I often think how worse maybe people would fare if they didn't have access to these creative outlets and means. And so could have been a lot worse in many cases. So I think there's a lot of richness and things to study there. Thank you for that conversation. So science, it's absolutely correct, James. The National Endowment for the Arts as a federal agency is, our mission is to promote the arts nationwide and to support arts projects. However, we also have a research department, and I guess I'm the proof here of it. And what we do is we apply social and behavioral sciences specifically to understand questions about the arts and the arts' value and impact. And that's really core to our mission as well. In addition to providing the arts, enabling the public to better understand and make decisions about engaging with the arts through data and through evidence. And so, I think you're right. It is another way of knowing, to use the phrase you said again earlier. And I think we need all these ways of knowing for a much more complex and complete understanding of why the arts matter. I'll just call out, there's a report that I often call out, which was done by the National Academy of Sciences in the US, that the NEA co-sponsored with the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Mellon Foundation years ago. It was called Branches from the Same Tree. And that's a quote from Albert Einstein. But it's a report about integrating arts and the arts and humanities with STEM, science, technology, and engineering and medicine, in fact, in higher education. It has some great lessons and as well as research that's in that report that maybe people will want to look at.
That's fantastic. Sunil, thank you. We don't have a whole lot of time, but could you just share with us one, and by the way, I should say full disclosure, I appreciate the support of the NEA, of the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project that we have here at the University of Pennsylvania, being designated an NEA research lab. It has been tremendously important, existentially important for our ability to conduct research that we have done. So it's making a huge difference in the world. And Sunil, could you just share with us one result, perhaps, that you think is particularly salient given this conversation?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm not trying to evade the question, but I don't think I have the soundbite that would encapsulate compellingly how the arts improve health and well-being. It has been shown through many, many different kinds of studies. But I would like to say that something that Maggie said about art therapy, we do a lot of research through our, we have, as you know, you're a beneficiary of our NEA Research Labs program, but we also support NEA Research Grants. And we have a program called Creative Forces, which I alluded to earlier, which works with military and veteran populations in particular. And all those programs often will study creative arts therapies. That's art therapy, dance therapy, music therapy, and indeed expressive writing to a large extent, and how they affect. And we've seen through many studies, individual studies oftentimes and meta-analyses, how these seem to improve, especially social and emotional aspects of health and well-being that are then allied with often physiological responses. So that's very compelling to me. And lately we've been working with the National Institutes of Health and supporting research on music and health. And Renee Fleming, soprano, has been an advocate for that work, and we're really grateful for her championing it. But that's another great project that I urge people to look at, and I can share more resources later.
Fantastic. Thank you. And there is, I just want to remind folks, there's the resource gallery that also has ways that you can follow up on some of these points that are being made during this panel. Sunil, I'd like to follow up with you we only have a few minutes left, but I'd kind of like to transition to practical application, kind of next steps, what we can do. And I want to ask you just briefly about public policy questions.
Yeah.
And first of all, just in terms of your work within the United States, what kinds of public policy opportunities might there be? But I also want to tag on to that a question that we got from the audience, which I think is a very important one. How can we connect arts and human flourishing and public policy in countries facing high adversity, so much so that it seems frivolous to invest in arts when other needs are more pressing? I know that's not just a question for other countries.
No.
That's an argument that oftentimes you hear, I'm sure, here in the United States as well.
Well, our chair, Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson, has really ramped up our agency's ability to work with other federal agencies at a very high level. I want to advertise on January 30th this next year, there's going to be, and it'll be live streamed, a conference, a summit called Healing, Bridging, and Thriving, which is all about integrating the arts with other sectors. So I urge the questioner to maybe go to arts.gov and learn more about that, and they can register for that. But to answer your question, I think it really has to do with recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of the arts in the public policy space. The strengths are these arts sometimes are invisible because they're threaded throughout so many different aspects of everyday life, right? Some of the countries that you might be referring to have lively, and even the US, lively indigenous arts traditions or cultural practices that get underlooked or overlooked, I should say, and not recognized as potentially therapeutic as maybe the more formal institutionalized programs we might have been referring to do. And we need a lot more research out there to understand, to taxonomize that work. I will point to one tangible result of working with other federal agencies, which is the Department of Health and Human Services has worked with all the federal agencies in the very many of them in the US, including the NEA, to develop something called the Equitable Long-Term Recovery and Resilience Plan. And this was born out of the COVID period, and you can go learn about this as well, which is really, it makes policy recommendations. And one of the beautiful things about it is it does, in fact, recognize the arts and culture at every turn as having a role to play in very specific policy advances that will encourage essentially human thriving. And I don't know if the term flourishing is used throughout the report, but that was very much front of mind for people and the architects of that report. So and the Surgeon General also has been a terrific ally of this effort.
Terrific. Thank you, Sunil. Maggie, I want to turn to you next, again, from this standpoint of application. I was struck in your initial comment about the performance earlier on. You had talked about the value of community and the value of knowing that we're not alone. And so when Osley shares with us her story, that makes us feel, although our stories, our experience is of course very different from that, yet there's something humanizing about it. There's something that reassures us that we're not alone in the sufferings, the particular sufferings that we may have experienced. And it gives us a model for how to frame those sufferings, not to be overcome, overwhelmed by them. Again, not to push them away and pretend that they didn't happen, but to engage with them honestly and creatively. I know that you focus a lot on arts and humanities, and within the context of education. Can you give us a sense of how we might think about ways the arts can be applied to support human flourishing in an educational context?
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you talk about education. This is also a topic I'm very passionate about. So from my own experience as an educator, also as a researcher, I've seen how the arts can be a powerful way for informing both curriculum and pedagogy for helping students learn and also thrive. So let me elaborate a little bit about the curriculum and pedagogy side by giving some examples. So when we talk about curriculum, we're gonna think about both formal and informal curriculum. Here is an example about formal curriculum. At my university, many teachers have been finding creative ways to incorporate art in their curriculum design. For example, working with actors, performing artists in the medical training programs. And for informal curriculum, it's about the things outside the traditional classroom, like experiential learning or service learning, like field trips and community projects. So here is a wonderful project I would like to share to this global community. That is innovative collaboration in Hong Kong, where I'm from, that brought together local schools and museums, facilitated by Beishan Foundation in Hong Kong. So teachers and the practitioners, they really had creative ideas for using arts and museums to engage students in different ways, like getting students to go to the Palace Museum to observe art, and also having them have some hands-on experience crafting Chinese art pieces. So this informal curriculum activities really help encourage students to feel, to think, and also to connect with each other, making the whole learning experience enriching. Also, art can also open up new ways for pedagogical innovation. I recently created a program called We Thrive, teaching university students well-being concepts and skills. So one part of the We Thrive program had a virtual art gallery, actually inspired by your research, James. So in the virtual art gallery, students got a chance to slowly, mindfully observe art and reflect on their feelings and thoughts. Also from our data, actually, we found that this immersive online space helped foster students' engagement, positive emotions, motivation, and sense of connection. So people often use the metaphor of plant and garden for education and flourishing. I would add that arts are like the sunlight, bringing colors and warmth, helping plants grow better, also enabling the whole garden flourish.
I love that metaphor, Maggie. Thank you. Terrific to hear about some of these ways in which the arts can be integrated into educational contexts. And you mentioned some of the work that we're doing here at the University of Pennsylvania. So in every year, I teach a course on the humanities and human flourishing as part of our Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. And I take my students to an art museum and ask them to look around at the art and then to do some slow looking. Because oftentimes I think with art, it's easy in our very busy world to try to schedule art quickly. You know, I'm in an art museum. There are so many masterpieces here. I basically have to rush from one to the other, grab a selfie, and then, you know, go to lunch. And that's not the way arts really are able to share with us their power. You know, you don't say, well, I don't have a whole lot of time to listen to music, but I really want to listen to music. So let me put it on double speed, and then I'll be able to listen to even more music. Then, you know, no, that's not the way it is. You have to take the time to engage and connect. And in that slow looking process, students report that their experience of the art is really transformed. They have that deeper connection. So Neil, do you want to chime in here?
I just want to add, if I could, that to your point, I mean, I think I've shared this with you before in some of our conversations about your lab's work, excellent work. The Association of American Medical Colleges and many medical training institutions and nursing schools employ and embed the arts somehow for this very reason into training, especially for stressed out residents and medical residents and others. And it's been, you know, the humanities as well. Medical humanities is, of course, its own field.
Yeah, and interestingly, just recently I heard about a program like that where the idea was to bring medical trainees into an art museum gallery so that they could enhance their observational skills, because glancing at a work of art is not the same thing as truly seeing it. And if you spend significant time with a painting or with other works in the arts, you really begin to get a deeper sense of it. And I was told that the participants in that project, in that program, were very very appreciative. And they said, you know, what we really loved about it was the well-being value, right? And so certainly it helps you to be a better medical provider by noticing more about the patients that you work with and so forth. But they found it helpful for themselves because it can help us to slow down. It can help us to see that there are many ways of understanding the world, and what just pops into our head, sometimes these negative attributions about the world aren't necessarily where we need to stay. So if anybody's interested in more of this work, when the pandemic hit, of course, we couldn't take students to art museums, so we created some virtual experiences that we also found to be very powerful. We're now, again, supported by the National Endowment for the Arts, continuing our work, looking at some of the well-being impacts of engaging with art online. So if you're interested in any of that, you can go to the resource gallery and find out more on that. Aranda, I want to turn to you, and we have about a minute left, but I'd like to get your thoughts about this application side of things, maybe connecting in with the meaning or whatever it is that you think you want to underscore at this stage.
Yes, so listening to the wonderful insights of Maggie and Sunil and you, James, one other way in which I think creativity and arts can play a really positive role in society is in terms of facilitating reconciliation, positive societal outcomes. I was thinking about the wonderful work of Elizabeth Pollock at Princeton, where she used radio dramas to increase reconciliation, pro-social behaviors in Rwanda. So, I think Sunil mentioned this earlier, that one thing that's wonderful about the arts is that it helps us complicate the human experience. And there can be a tendency in the wake of adversity to adapt to very sort of extreme or binary form of thinking, right? Where you think of yourself against the world or your group against the other group. And I think one important role the arts can play is in maybe complicating, right, our understanding the world, especially when we're struggling in the wake of adversity. And I hope there can be more research that tries to understand that role that the arts can play in promoting that type of positive societal outcome going forward.
Thank you, Aranda. I just want to underscore that notion of complexity. I think that is a very, very important point to dwell on for a moment. Thinking about meaning. Meaning is complex. Mm-hmm. And there's the temptation, the danger in our lives today to jump to an easy solution, to an easy resolution, or to a soundbite. And life, meaning, richly lived, is complex. As you mentioned at the very beginning, it involves times of difficulty, times of adversity. It involves times of joy. And it involves ways of interacting with those experiences of adversity that can help to fuel our connection with others, our compassion, our engagement with life. So I want to thank each of our panelists for being with us today. Terrific discussion. Much more could be said, and we look forward to the further scientific advances that each one of you will be leading. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sure everybody just feels energized and enthused after those amazing and moving performances. So thank you so very much. And of course, our fantastic moderators, Ben Arthur and Dr. James Pawelski, thank you very much for that discussion. Dr. Maggie Zahi, Sunil Iyengar, and Dr. Aranda, thank you for that stimulating exploration into the psychological benefits of the arts. Your insights and your recommendations on how to use the arts to help people and communities around the world resonate with us all, and the results speak for themselves. We have seen this in everyday life, in the lives of children, in the lives of the sick, in the lives of soldiers returning to war. The evidence is out there. It is ubiquitous, but thank you very much for bringing us back to the center.